All right, well, welcome to the first ever ALV Live. As Katie mentioned, we'll be doing this every single month. So before we dive into our monthly theme of fighting fear and overcoming your fear of failure, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what Amala Vida is, because it's a new concept, it's a crazy sounding word, and so a lot of you might not have been introduced yet to all the exciting things that we do. So I'm Nicole, one of the co-founders of Amala Vida, and these are my two business partners here, Katie and Forum. And we have founded this company called Amala Vida, which means love life in Spanish, or we call it love your life, so it doesn't sound like love life. But that's the meaning and the concept. And the inspiration came from Ecuador, which is one of the places that we do retreats, so I'll get into that in a second. But to really, truly embrace that spirit like the people in Ecuador do, we wanted to bring that kind of concept here as well. But the ultimate goal is for people to love their life. And so the way that we help folks accomplish that is through coaching. And so we have four main components of what we do at Amala Vida. The first is memberships, which is what we're here about today. And by joining our memberships, it's a really solid foundation and platform to constantly be bettering yourself and improving yourself and learning and growing every single month, which is something that I think we all want to do and understand is a good thing, but it's a lot of work to do all on your own. So what we've built, we think, is a really great and affordable way to do that through our support. So we like to think of it like joining a gym, except for your life. So how can you constantly be working out your life, getting better as a person, and hopefully getting happier while you do it. So each month with our memberships, we have a tool and a set of resources relative to our theme. This monthly theme is fighting fear of failure. Some upcoming themes we have in the pipeline are things like gratitude, setting goals, managing stress, being more productive. So a lot of really helpful stuff that hopefully our members out there are excited about. And then the next kind of major component of services that we have is programs. And so for us, that's more like your boot camp. So maybe you hate your job and you want to find something you're more passionate about, or maybe you have absolutely no clue what you're passionate about and you need some help defining who you are as a person and what you want to do. So those are the more intensive programs that we have that are usually 2 weeks to a month, and they're mainly built through what we call e-coaching, which is technology that's we think the newest evolution of self-reflection and a real pragmatic way to make change in your life with, at the same time, not checking you in a box where you're either an introvert or an extrovert. You're you, and we help you figure out what that is by arriving at your own conclusions through technology. Which brings me to the third piece, which is private coaching. So technology can't do everything. Sometimes you want to talk with a human, and so these are our humans. And we do actually have another coach who's just joined our team as well, named Ellen. So we've got a really awesome team of coaches that are here when you need that one-on-one support, maybe to supplement some of the program work or membership work that you're doing, or if you prefer to specifically work with an individual. And then retreats. Sometimes the best way to make change is to remove yourself from your life. Go to somewhere crazy like Ecuador, or India is another retreat we have in the works right now. To help you either self-reflect or find a new way to grow that you probably wouldn't have accomplished in your comfortable setting and your surroundings. So those are the main components of what we do at Amala Vida, and the reason that we're all here today is for the membership piece of it, which obviously this call is open to all of our Amala Vida family, but is really geared to kind of reinforce and inspire relative to the monthly theme. So anybody have a question about that? All right. So we will then dive in and get started talking to our lovely panel here about fighting their fear of failure. But before we do that, we'll pass it to Katie,
nickname revealed,
to talk a little bit more about what that means to you and to us at Amala Vida.
Sure, thank you, Nicole. So our first theme, fighting fear, is actually one that's really close to my heart and one I was super excited about because as a coach of 4 years, it's something that comes up over and over again. And fear is the biggest obstacle that I see to people achieving their goals and their dreams. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily surface as fear, or it's not identified as fear. Sometimes it's identified as not having enough time, or not having enough money, or not being in the right location. But really, often once you dig deep enough, what you find is that real driver behind all of our excuses is fear. And that's okay. You know, fear isn't a bad thing. Fear is actually a very natural emotion, and it's a survival emotion. You know, we were built with fear because we need to fear. You know, if you went for a swim in the Pacific Ocean and you saw a shark and you didn't feel any fear, you'd probably get your head bitten off. So we don't want that. So we want to feel fear sometimes. But the key is we don't want to feel it all the time. And sometimes our brain tricks us into feeling fear when it's not necessarily something that's going to kill us or even injure us. So it's kind of a false fear. So sometimes fear is validated, like the shark in the ocean, or, you know, I think that it's a good thing to have fear around not wearing your seatbelt when driving. You know, those things protect your life. But then other times it's not as validated, such as my fear around public speaking. You know, sometimes I feel like it's very overwhelming and I feel a lot of anxiety, but public speaking isn't going to kill me. It's not going to injure me. But sometimes the fear feels like it is going to. So I think the first thing is to really identify what's validated fear and what's false fear. And sometimes that's obvious, and sometimes it's not so obvious. And so one way that I like to do that is to think about the potential upside and the cost. So if things go wrong, what's the worst possible thing that can happen? So in this scenario with public speaking, the worst possible thing that can happen is that I'll probably stutter a lot and I might humiliate myself, and you guys might think, what's she talking about? But ultimately, I'm still going to go to bed at night and wake up tomorrow and live my life. What's the best possible thing that can happen? Hopefully, I can inspire a few people, educate, inform, entertain, and you know, that's my purpose. That's what I love doing. That's what I do as a profession and for my career. So for me, you know, that potential upside is so much more worth it than that potential risk of failure. So I think that that's a really good way of identifying, you know, to think about, you know, is this fear validated, or is this just my mind playing tricks on me? And once you figure out that it is your mind playing tricks on you, I think it's really important to not try and jump too far. I think it's really important to just take baby steps, bite-sized pieces. I think that sometimes we get really overwhelmed by, say we want to start a business. Obviously there's a lot of fear around that because you think, well, I'm here and the idea of running a successful business looks so far away, and that can be so daunting and so overwhelming. But how about just coming up with a name, or, you know, thinking about what you want to achieve, just taking that next small step. You know, for me, maybe it's not about delivering a TED Talk, maybe it's about getting together in a safe environment with my friends and family and speaking to them about something that I'm really passionate about. So if anything, I think the big takeaways are, first of all, to identify that fear is there, to try and dig beyond the excuses of not having enough time and money and go, what is really holding me back? Is it fear? And if it is fear, is it validated fear? Or is it just my mind playing tricks on me? And if it's my mind playing tricks on me, what's one thing that I can do today or this week to take myself one step closer to what I'm trying to achieve? So,
yeah. We were going to have an applause sign.
All right.
Wait, I got this.
So now, on to kind of talk a little bit more about fear, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole and these awesome women here.
This is our free panel. So every month we'll have some exciting guest speakers, whether that's one or we're lucky enough to have 3 this month. So we want to first do a fun little game to get to know you guys. And loosen it up a little bit. And then just for everyone who's joining us online, Forum's manning the computer, so if you have questions or thoughts at any time, just comment them on the feed, and we will bring them up here to our ladies as well.
And when this sign goes up, we applaud.
All right. Okay. So we will have 30 seconds each for you to answer a series of questions, or actually more so fill in the blank, with the first thought that comes to mind, and whoever answers the most questions within that 30-second time frame gets 3 months free membership with Amala Vivo.
Okay, so ask a question, we just jump in and answer it quickly, or do we have 30
Yeah.
seconds?
So
You look at
me
it.
first. Well, I would win this. We'll start with you, Christy. And so it would just be filling in the blank. So let's say the last restaurant I ate at was, and then you would fill in the blank.
Okay.
And
Alright.
a lot of serious.
And I will. And you've just got to try and get as quick as possible so you can answer as many as possible.
So you're gonna like drill me for 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just go really slow.
So people don't need to.
This is a valuable membership, Chrissy. Okay, you ready?
Ready, set, go.
My favorite place on earth is.
Anywhere it's sunny.
All right. My biggest pet peeve is.
People who are late.
My favorite swear word is.
Shit.
A penguin walks through the door wearing a sombrero. What's his name?
Joe.
At this time yesterday, I was.
With you.
Something not many people know about me is.
Quick. I don't know.
You can skip. If you want.
Skip.
Stop.
All right.
You got 5.
Woo!
I think I have to go back to that last question.
I
It's
know,
over.
that was a very intentional. Oh, time's up. Okay.
All right. So we have Corey up next.
Okay.
All right. Ready?
Ready.
Yep.
This is harder than the phone timer. Okay, go.
My last meal on earth would be.
Pagliacci pizza.
Whoa. My guilty pleasure is.
Pagliacci pizza.
My childhood nickname was.
Corey, I didn't have a nickname.
All right. I secretly have a crush on.
Oh shoot! I can't say what I really think.
Oh.
Man.
Oh.
A secret
no.
crush on.
You can
Oh, I'm
skip it.
stumped on this. Skip.
I couldn't imagine my life without.
Friends.
A penguin walks through the door wearing a sombrero. What does he say?
Oh, I know his name. Hola?
Stop.
5.
Okay, it's 5 and 5. All you need to get is a 6. And then it's all good.
I know.
See, they have a question that freezes you up.
I think you
I told you guys the
I
other
feel
night
like you've
at
got to use
lunch.
your skip
Okay.
effectively.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is Colleen up next. So we have a tricky panel here of Christy, Corey, and Colleen. So hopefully I won't screw it up.
We only talk to
People
people
with C
beginning
names.
with C. Okay, ready?
Ready?
Go.
If you look under my bed, you'll probably find.
Laundry.
The last song that was stuck in my head was.
Sorry, Justin Bieber.
Oh.
My most used emoji is.
The kiss.
The first thing I do after winning the lottery is.
Donate to my Boys and Girls Club.
Oh.
When I think no one's watching, I.
Dance.
A penguin walks through the door wearing a sombrero. Why is he here?
The nachos.
6.
Stop.
You got
You
You were on it with
Cool
that.
and calm.
Well,
Yes.
well done. All right.
All right.
Now let's
okay.
get into the serious stuff.
Yeah, now that we've done that, let's get into the fighting the fear. Okay, so if each of you could just start, and maybe we'll start with you, Corey. Tell us a little bit about some of the fear that you've faced in your life and what brought that about.
Okay, so there are so many ways that I could answer this question because I feel like fear has been a dominant issue in my life, which is unfortunate. And I'm 38 now, and I think I started to really understand how to be liberated from fear. I think is the best way to say it, because fear is not liberating. It was about my 35th year of life. So it's been a long journey, but I've had traumatic instances in my life since I was young. You know, criminal activity in my life, seeing things happen to people I love, and I'm very open about that. So if anyone wants to talk about it, I probably don't know if I want to share it on live streaming. But so that's where fear had a seed in my life when I look back on it. But then in my adult years, I see fear of failure in my marriage, fear and a failure to launch from being afraid, fear from more huge negative instances in my life. You know, like I was home alone and my house gets broken into, and I confront a criminal. You know, my children are there, and that was a huge issue. I was just talking to my friends about that one the other day. And the most recent one was watching my marriage fail, and that was the one that dropped me on the floor. That was just sideswiped me, and I was shocked by it, and that was probably the last straw the catalyst for me to learn how in my own life how to conquer fear, that this was enough and it had been building and I needed to be bigger and greater than what was holding me down. And so from there, my next fear, which was everything was less scary after that one. My next fear was starting a business, which I'm now working on now, and it's no longer scary. You know, there's days where it's a new situation, but I think that overall, I've found, and this is the prevalent theme in my fearfulness now that I understand, is freedom from being fear, and the key for freedom in that is humility. So just constantly saying, I don't know what I'm talking about. I am going to flub this up. So that is kind of my journey in a nutshell, without taking too much of the time here.
Yeah, thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that. So it sounds like there was kind of a series of events in your life that led you to ultimately realize, okay, I have to tackle this, and that's been helping you going forward.
Yeah. So it's just a long answer, you know, and going through counseling, you know, and talking to counselors and talking to friends and opening myself up to people and hearing what they have to say has been huge. And you know, and there's been a number of catalysts that have helped me overcome fear. You know, it's the things I just mentioned. It was my children. It was getting an animal, something that I had to love and focus on separately. It was going on medication when I needed to be on medication to help me, like, my mental processing come back. You know, it was this whole string of things. It wasn't just one clear moment, you know, for me. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you for sharing all of that. For me, there are really two big tent poles of fear that have continued to rear their heads in my life. The first of which is around public speaking, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about tactical tips and tricks that we use to combat these fears, but it's been pretty crippling throughout my life, and really manifested earlier this year when my manager said, you know, you're a really great worker, but no one knows the work that you're doing. Like, you don't have the voice or the presence to let others know how successful you are at work. And then the second big tent pole for me is a fear of being found out. There's a lot more literature now about imposter syndrome. And my undergraduate degree was in visual arts, but I moved to Seattle to work at Microsoft in a technology and business environment. And for the first few years of my time at the company, was constantly thinking, oh my gosh, they're gonna know that I don't belong here eventually. My manager is gonna flag this to HR. They're gonna know that I made films as an undergrad, and really combating those thoughts and realizing that I have a unique perspective to bring to the table was a fear that I've combated pretty consistently since moving out here and taking that job.
Well, I have a couple different categories of fear, but so I'll start with one, which is kind of like, well, there's things like fear that I tackled with flying and fear of heights. Those are two things that kind of different than, I don't know how you like categorize it, but I went through a season, and I think kind of the root of it was just that feeling of always wanting to have control over things, and like Corey mentioned, like going through some traumatic moments where maybe you feel completely out of control, and where when it comes to like the fear of flying, for example, I had traveled all over the place, grown up on traveling and taking trips, and then all of a sudden had several events happen over a course of a short amount of time, and then all of a sudden found that I was afraid to get on an airplane, so much so that it like crippled me from getting on planes at the airport. So that was one fear that I faced, and another fear, like I mentioned, was heights, and kind of overcome that was to like move to the top floor of a building, which really helped me overcome it. So these seem like simple things, but they can be very crippling. Yeah. So that's like, I don't know what you would categorize those things as, but those were two kind of big fears that I faced. And then more like emotional fears, I guess, is what I would say, is fear of failure. And Similar things that J.K. Rowling said in that in her speech earlier. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of finances, and I guess through a series of different events with that as well, those fears become more real and more intense. So those are just a few things that I would say have been dominant fears at times in life.
Great. Thank you for sharing as well. And it sounds like there's a consistent theme that fear doesn't just show up in one way in your life, that it can manifest itself in different ways, whether that's, an experience or an emotion that you're feeling. So I want to talk about something that you mentioned, that feeling when it is completely crippling and you're at the point where you can't move forward. So obviously you found the strength to move to the top of a building or to get on a plane again. What helped you get to that point, and were you able to do that on your own, or did you seek out some sort of external help to get you to do that?
Great question. So for different things in different parts of life, when it came to issues like fear of flying, I think the one thing that I kept doing was I kept going and just forcing myself to go. I did reach the moment of like getting to the airport and not being able to get on a plane, which was so crazy. It was a significant weekend in my life, and I was going to meet a bunch of friends on this trip, and I literally I had an anxiety attack, which that's a whole nother story, but just understanding how fear can really paralyze you and grip you. It was in that moment that I had never had an experience like that before, and that's when I realized how real fear can be and how crippling and paralyzing it can be in people's lives. But I think some significant things that have helped me overcome different fears have definitely been surrounding myself with positive people, friends, family members who push me forward in those moments where maybe I would want to hold back. Those I've been fortunate to have people on my journey who have been those voices in my life, and then in addition to that, there have been moments of seeking professional help, because I think the root of when you're tackling fear, there's so many things that contribute to what you're facing, and I think there's moments where you need to step in, you need to seek counsel and really get tools from there to move forward. And then really in my personal journey, like my faith has been like something that's given me something that to hold on to in moments of fear. Like there's something beyond yourself, and that's been something that I've held on to in those moments of crippling fear.
Great. What about you? And Chrissy brings up another point as well, in addition to what kind of helped you power through, but she brought up she surrounded herself by certain people. Was there anyone that was extremely inspiring or helpful in your journey as well to get you through?
I had a handful of friends that I would say saved my life, and I wouldn't say that is any understatement, because there were times where I would, in my worst days, where I would sit and think, I don't want to live. I don't want to live. I can't face this life. I'm afraid of this life. And it was those friends. And it was honesty. It was being honest with them. And that was key for me. It was being transparent and vulnerable. But when you asked Christy, one thing that was like a practical step, I was remembering, I think, and I tell all my friends and people in my life, because it's amazing too when you are vulnerable to get through this, how then people reach out to you and tell you, and they're vulnerable back, and then you understand suddenly, as you're going through your darkest days, you're like, every single one of us is going through something. There's nobody who's not going through something. And I remember at one point sitting there and counting people who were going through huge, monumental issues in their life, and I was into my 20s in just a matter of seconds. I'm like, everybody. If they aren't currently in it, they are just going through it, or just, they're just on the cusp one way or another. But so one thing I say constantly, there's a myriad of different ways to approach this, and they all help. Like everything I've mentioned thus far, and you've mentioned, but one of them for me was writing everything down, everything from how I felt at that moment, so that I could look back and remember how I felt, or just putting it out there. And it wasn't, I hesitate to even say journal because I always feel like the word journal means someone's going to see it. You know what I mean? And the point was never to see it. It wasn't for me to, maybe I have to read it again, but just to process slowly. To process slowly how you feel and put words on your emotions. And then beyond that, I would say to the people who would ask me, how am I doing, or how are you living through this, or what should I do? I would say, beyond that, write down every single book you've ever wanted to read, every single movie you've ever wanted to see, every single place you've ever wanted to visit, every single goal that you've had. Just write it all down, wherever. And it's still to this day on my phone. I typed in my notes. And just do them. Just do one at a time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And do the simple to the big. There's nothing holding you back, And I did. And then you also are starting to ask people, because you're like, what other books do I need to be reading? And you meet someone and you'd be scared, you'd be paralyzed by fear because you're in a new situation that you never thought you'd be in, and you don't know how to talk to people, and you say, well, what's your favorite book? What movie should I watch today when I go home and I'm alone? And I haven't been alone in 15 years, and suddenly I'm by myself. Like, what do I do? And then it was something, and then, I started. I went to Iceland. Like, I didn't even have Iceland on my list, but I wanted to see the Northern Lights. And so that was just the first thing I did on my list. I was like, I'm going to go see those Northern Lights.
Yeah.
You just get on a plane and you just have to do it.
Yeah.
And what happened on your flight back?
Well,
Yes. What
good things
happened on your
happen.
flight back?
Yes.
Really good things. Really good things.
Good things happen when you put yourself out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you take that step to get over your fear, even as fearful, as scary it is, as fear producing getting over fear is,
Yeah.
right? Like, the thought of getting over your obstacles are almost more terrifying than the obstacle itself, right? Because it means something. It means you have to do something about it. You have to get on that plane in order to get over that.
And I think what you're saying really echoes what Katie talked about earlier, that going to Iceland when you just think, I'm here, Iceland's there, is really daunting, but starting it to make it real in the world in some small way, just by writing it down, it already puts you on, kind of on that path.
You're on a
It's
journey.
the first step. What about you, Holly?
I'm gonna revisit super tactical steps, if that sounds okay. So to revisit my fear of public speaking, I've actually gone through some executive coaching since then and have gotten some really great advice, including the importance of breathing. Katie touched on the physicality of fear and how it manifests in your body. And breathing is obviously a way to slow your heart rate and to calm a lot of those emotions. I think the second thing I'll say about public speaking is to remember that no one cares about what you're doing. Everyone has really busy lives, and whether it's a presentation that you're giving at work or even pitching a business idea, you are probably a very small amount of time in someone's larger day and not super high on their priority list. So huge opportunity to make an impact there, but the downside is relatively small. So making a mistake is something that might seem really big to you, but to put it in perspective, it's probably not that big. I think the last thing I'll say there is that I made a really big investment in deciding to go to business school, which is not mandatory for anyone who wants to address their public speaking capabilities. There's a lot of content online right now that makes business school sort of a very expensive endeavor. And it was important to me, though, to get some of the business skills that were lacking in my imposter syndrome, get some of that communications coaching, and to get the 3 letters after my name that would help me tell a story about how effective of a human being I could be.
It's great, and one thing that you didn't bring up that I just want to applaud you for, as well as I know we've talked a little bit about failure being a muscle, and you have to keep working it. And it's not one time that you stand up in public speak and all of a sudden you're over it, but you have to kind of keep at it. And within seconds after I asked Colleen to be here, which is, you know, probably a really frightening experience, especially for someone who has a fear of public speaking, she was like, I'm there. So I think just there's something to be said for continuing to put yourself in those situations and keep working that muscle. So I think that's really great.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so we talked a little bit about external people. Is there anyone else that either of you want to share that was really inspirational, whether it was someone you knew or a celebrity or an author that really helped you through? Or
Sure.
yeah.
I'll
if
keep
not,
going.
we'll keep going. We can
No,
talk
I
about
think
penguin
the
and
one,
umbrella.
one thing that's always helps me in those moments of crippling fear, or just facing those moments in life, has been looking at other people's journeys. So I've always gravitated towards people's stories, their journeys, and I've found a lot of confidence and hope by hearing other people's journeys, whether it be a friend, a family member, or an author, or a celebrity, you know, whoever it might be. People who are willing to put their stories out there and be vulnerable and share has definitely pushed me forward. I think there's moments where I've thought of certain people at certain times that I've been in a situation and thought, they overcame that, I can push through. So there's, I think people have definitely, and their journeys have been positive for me. A specific person would be, my dad has been a super inspirational voice in my life of just constantly challenging me, pushing me forward in those moments where maybe I would naturally hold back because of circumstances and that deal with fear. So.
Great. So let's talk about the times when you have failed and things don't go your way, even though it sounds like you've all put some really great strategies in place and have combated those things. What's an experience that you've had maybe that you can share where you did fail at something, and what was kind of the aftermath of that, the consequences, and how did you kind of pick yourself up?
Sure. So another part of combating my fear has been taking on this temporary role. I work at Microsoft, and I'm temporarily on loan to the philanthropies team. And a part of my day job right now is to give presentations to large groups of people every single day. And one of the first presentations that I had to give, you know, I hadn't flexed that muscle in a really long time. It was something that I wasn't looking forward to, and I really let the fear consume me. And that, you know, the way that came to light was I wasn't preparing, I was avoiding it, waiting till the last minute to like understand the logistics of the situation. And then in addition to that fear, my manager said, I'm going to show up to your first presentation. So all of these fears were sort of realized at the same time. Needless to say, it didn't go over super well. I got there, I needed to like mess with the technology in the room, and I was sort of droning on and not really keeping the audience engaged. And the way that I decided to deal with it was to totally own the narrative. Right after the presentation, I emailed my manager, thanked her for coming, and said, I think that I need to improve in X, Y, and Z ways. And instead of waiting for that negative feedback from her to come, I totally owned up to it. And I said, these are the things that I'm going to fix for next time. And she approached me afterwards and said, you know, there's nothing better for a manager than to have an example of how an employee is growing. So when you are like knee deep in that failure, and I totally was, it was like such a bad scene. If you can figure out like, okay, how am I gonna tell the story of making this failure a success next time? That was really appreciated.
Right, Clary.
I'm afraid you're gonna ask me that. I think that I mean, sitting here right now, I'm like, okay, well, my failure currently is the fact that I didn't pre-read the question. That he didn't send me. So I'm like, oh no. I think that immediately. They keep saying, did you read the question? I was like, no. It's a narrative. The narrative. Humility. Right. And I can grow because next time, if I'm ever asked again, I will pre-read the question.
There you go.
So I mean, right now, I'm feeling, so for me, it's not so much I'm listening to you, and it's not so much I have this one situation of failure. I'm going to honestly say, I fail every day. Every single day. So for me, there's like, no, like, oh, today was my failure. No, it's like, I wake up, okay, today's the day. Today is the day I'm going to make it through. I'm going to be patient. I'm going to be kind. I'm not going to use Chrissy's favorite cuss word. I'm not, you know what I mean? I'm going to be this person today. And then I go to bed every single night going, well, I didn't do that. So tomorrow I'm going to do that. You know, I fail every day. I let people down every single day, but it is owning the narrative, and it is like humbling yourself and saying sorry when you have to say sorry, because you're giving yourself grace and you're giving yourself freedom then. And people, again, like I said earlier, when you are humble and when you're open, they're like, yeah, I suffer the same afflictions, you know? Like, we were talking when we were all doing the meet and greet, just as something as simple as saying, hi, I'm Corey, I'm Christy, it's good to meet you. I'm sorry, I forgot your name 30 seconds later, right? It's like, just always be humble. And that is like a huge obstacle for getting over failure, the fear of failure, just the fear of fear, and it's in everything, right? So I hope that answered your question adequately.
And it sounds similar. I mean, the humility is definitely a component, and also a self-awareness. To be able to do that, you have to recognize those areas where you're failing, and that's what allows you to improve. If you don't recognize it, how can you get any better? So.
Yeah, and I think personally, for so long, I felt like you couldn't admit failure, or else you were a failure.
Right.
And it's totally, in my opinion, polar opposite. You know, to admit failure is success. To admit, and I'm saying fear is failure. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but to admit fear or weakness or what you perceive as weakness is success, right? It'd be a tough person to say that that's not.
I agree.
Yeah.
Put that shit on Instagram.
No, it's on. It's been on.
Wait, restate the original question. I got me lost in all the
You
conversation.
failed, and what was the aftermath of that? Was it as catastrophic as perhaps you would imagine, and how did you pick yourself up from that?
Okay, yeah, let me frame it with something before I dive into it. I remember prior to facing some of my biggest fears, you mentioned this, Katie, earlier. Someone sat me down and were like, you need to write out, if this, then what, you know? So kind of going through those exercises, I did that prior to facing some of my bigger fears in life. And so it was a good reminder to go back and kind of remember, like, if this, then what? What is that worst case scenario? And how are you gonna make it through? And realizing that every time you face your biggest fear, then you're still gonna wake up the next day. You're gonna get through it. But okay, wait, I'm lost again.
That's great. Is there a specific example that you wanted to share, or that was kind of?
I think that just kind of thinking. I think I'll still continue to go back to that when I have fear. Just like, if this, then what? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I haven't been keeping track of time at all, so I'm going to guess and say it's a great time to open it up to questions for any of you in the room or anyone on Facebook who has a question for our panel.
And even, questions or even your own stories or views or insights or what you took away. Shannon,
So there's a lot of females right here and right here.
Yeah.
Do you think this particular topic and our sort of fear of fear or our adoption of fear is different than our male population?
That's a really
Either
interesting.
age-based or otherwise?
That's a really interesting question. I would like to open it up to the men.
I guess I would say, just as a guy, that that this isn't just a woman thing. Like, this is a human thing. You know, this is something that we all face. That there's challenges that come. And
Would you say that women feel more comfortable to talk about it?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's a vulnerable thing for anybody to talk about.
For sure.
Yeah.
Do you have any perspectives first?
Well, yeah, so maybe I'm not. I think
I think it's different for everyone. So I don't think it's a male female thing. I think it's an individual thing. For me, I think the fears that I generally deal with are very much the imposter syndrome. So I mean, not to get too much in my own personal story, but throughout my life, I kind of always had this feeling within me that someday I'd get caught out, or someone would go and I'd be like, yeah, you got me. And I remember maybe 4 years ago coming across an article on imposter syndrome, and I was like, that really seems to resonate. So I think maybe as a male, you probably you build up a dexterity to a lot of these fears, which you kind of experience, but you kind of, I think, programmed from a very early age to kind of process them internally and not communicate it. But I think also with that, I think maybe as a man you have a bigger fear of, one of the biggest fears is actually opening up, and that's something I've struggled with. But I think as far as things that I can relate to, the imposter syndrome is something that I kind of deal with every morning, and it's difficult. I think what can be difficult for a man is, especially just with the imposter syndrome, is that it can actually be mistaken for drive. So you're kind of constantly just out there doing everything you can, and people go, they're very driven, but it's really just primarily out of fear that is pushing you kind of that particular way.
I have a question on that. You mentioned the article that you read 4 years ago. The question is, since reading that article, or even throughout your career, do you feel that, you have somewhat progressed or overcome that? And if so, what has helped you to do so?
I think, to be honest, the label kind of helped. So reading an article kind of really helped me a lot to make me feel like that it wasn't particularly real. But that being said, I don't think it goes away. So I think it's probably lessened to an extent. But I think for the majority, I think one of the challenges for me is the environment I live in now, and the people that I associate with are not really my natural habitat, and it's not really kind of what I'm used to. So I think in that, I still wake up every day thinking someone's going to go, you're not meant to be here.
Do you mind if I offer a follow-up to that?
Yeah, sure.
So a lot of the classes that I was in business school were case-based, so you would get assigned a role, like you're going to be the CEO and you're going to be the CMO and you're going to be in charge of technology. And, we would do this every week. And I turned to a fellow student and I said, I didn't realize that business school was going to be like acting school. And he said, business is acting. All you're doing is acting in a role, and you just get really good at playing a specific part. And that's really what helped me overcome some of my imposter syndrome was, everyone's just acting here. So just a little tidbit to add to that.
I think for me, one thing I loved about something Corey said was the more you open up to people and the more vulnerable you let yourself be, the more you let others in, the more they let you in, and you realize you're not alone. Everyone has a story. Everyone's has their own challenges and is trying to overcome something, and no one's alone in that journey. And I think especially in today's society of social media, and you look at Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn, and everyone's life looks so shiny, it's like, they're in the Bahamas and they just got, this person's getting married, and everyone looks like they're doing something amazing, but that's just the highlight reel. And everyone has a behind the scenes. And I think that for as long as we compare ourselves with that highlight reel, we're going to feel really insecure about our own lives. And I think letting other people in and telling your story and hearing their story is so empowering to help you overcome, those insecurities and that fear. Mm-hmm. And if I could just mention one other thing, another thing Corey said about failing every day. And I applaud that because I actually think that that's a great thing. Obviously, it depends in what way that you're failing, but I think that people perceive failure as a really negative thing. And I think reframing how we perceive failure is really powerful, not seeing it as this, this negative thing, but actually as an opportunity or an avenue to achieve amazing things. I think without putting yourself out there and without giving yourself the opportunity to fail, you also don't give yourself the opportunity to succeed. And I watched this awesome TED talk about this guy that had a huge fear of rejection, crippling fear of rejection, so much so he was trying to start his own business, and he just, couldn't confront any of the sales calls or meetings because he was just so scared of rejection. So what he did was he sought out to seek rejection, and he went on an experiment of 30 days of rejection, and he did the most absurd and stupid things to try and get rejected, right? Like he went to Krispy Kreme donuts and he asked for donuts to be especially made in the shape of the Olympic rings. But what surprised him was that a lot of the time he didn't get rejected, and when he did, the next morning he woke up and life goes on. And I think sometimes putting yourself in situations where you can fail makes you realize, it's not the end of the world. And sometimes amazing things happen that you wouldn't have had the opportunity to experience if you hadn't have put yourself out there. So I celebrate failure as an opportunity to experience and see amazing new things. So
that's great. Yeah. And I think there's two sides to the highlight reel. Obviously it can be really negative if you're in this constant state of comparison, which is hard not to be given the world that we live in. But it's easy to look around and think everyone has their life together and everyone's doing great, and you're having this feeling of, I'm not. But on the flip side, you might also have this feeling of, I'm not, and you never know who you're inspiring by taking those steps and having those failures. You never know the people that are actually seeing that when you think that you're failing or you're flailing, and they're actually seeing it as a really positive thing. So keep at it.
Are there any other comments or questions, ideas, stories anyone wants to put out there?
I have a funny little story. I was just thinking about it and how celebrating failure, and practically how can we celebrate failure every day, right? And then everybody else will start celebrating failure, and we see on the Facebook and the shiny examples like you said. And then going back to your question and bringing it all together, going back to your question of who's that one person, and Chrissy said her dad. There's one person in my life who celebrates failure, and it's my mom. And she was just thinking about this, and she makes this beautiful cake with my daughter, and it's like a rainbow cake. There's a famous chef who now markets his cakes in boxes. I don't even know his name, but everyone knows it except for me. And it's rainbow colored, and it's difficult to make, and it's something I would never do. So my mom comes to my house, and she's doing it with my daughter, and they forget to put eggs in the cake. And so they work for hours on this cake, and it's this rainbow mess, and there's frosting. And her response is classic. It is what I would like to be able to do every day. She just wholeheartedly started laughing. And so everybody around her just started laughing. Nobody was so upset about this cake that's just in this big pile. My kitchen was a disaster. But there's this big pile that, you know what? If we could just somehow figure out how to laugh at ourselves in those times that are laughable, truly, instead of beating ourselves up that was a failure. I didn't get on the airplane. I said these negative words, or I said this wrong, or I stuttered, or I had food in my teeth the whole day, or whatever it is, or my marriage, the big things, those are the little things, my marriage failed. All these things that we can look at the big and the little, and we could just go, I flubbed it up. I totally flubbed it up, and I'm going to find the humor in this and go on, hopefully, And so since that example on Facebook, and you don't want to be too annoying, but on Facebook, I started just hit on my failures, on the ones that could be laughable to other people. I post them. And you probably see, I'm fail. And that's it. I fell the other day in mud in a stone yard. And I was looking through scraps, and I fell, and I'm covered in mud. And I'm going down, going, falling, and no one looks at me, and I'm covered in mud. I'm yeah, that's a failure. Post that one, fail. And I drop all these glasses all over my floor, and the shattered glass. I'm that's another fail. Just post that one. You saw that one, fail.
Yeah, I think the humor and also the lessons. I think that in every failure, there's in every failure I can think of in my life, and I think probably all of you in your life, there's a takeaway. There's something you can take from that and do something a little bit different next time, or a little bit better next time. And if you can take something from every failure, I don't see that as a failure, because it makes you a little bit more successful the next time. So I think it's a continuous journey. We try, we put ourselves out there. Sometimes it goes awesome, and sometimes we flunk it, but we take something, we learn something, and we try again. And for me, I feel that's not failure, that's experience. So
We do have a question from our Facebook Live from Jerome. And this is for the entire panel, so whoever wants to go. The question is there any danger in putting too much pressure on yourself to face fears or challenge yourself, which may only serve to increase emotional distress or anxiety? Is it fair for people to search for meaning in their own ways? So there's a few questions in that. If I can break it up, the first part of it is there any danger in putting too much pressure on yourself to face fears or challenge yourself, which may only serve to increase emotional distress or anxiety?
Yeah, I can start. I just finished reading the book Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Won't Stop Talking, I think is the tagline, by Susan Cain. And I found so much solace in what she was writing. Like, oh, when I don't want to go out on a Friday night, it's because I'm an introvert, and that's okay, and I should just like lean into my introversion. And I was discussing it with a friend, and he said, well, if that becomes the excuse every single time, how are you going to grow as a person? So I do think that there's a balance between honoring who you are and acknowledging who you could be. Honoring your comfort zone and stretching it every once in a while as well.
Same time, I guess there are times that we all know about in life that are dangerous, right? And that it is emotionally dangerous for you with other people who could be abusive towards you. And I would think that would be a time where you have to protect yourself and your emotional duress. You know, if you're in an abusive relationship emotionally, and it's too volatile, then yes, you absolutely should be cautious of yourself and not be a doormat. There's that balance between fear and safe fear. You know what I mean? And I think that's probably when you need to protect yourself.
I think that's a good point, because to Katie's earlier example, we think with the validated fear that it has to be physical, but there is a validated emotional fear as well that you still should protect yourself from. But it sounds like the common theme is that it's a balance.
Yeah, it's difficult to find that balance.
Part of that, though, is when you're in those abusive kind of situations, the fear is leaving it and setting the boundaries and getting yourself out of that situation. So there's such freedom when you actually can remove yourself from those circumstances and situations. I agree with everybody, there's that balance, but I also would say that for all the fear that I've faced, pushing through the fear and the freedom and the experiences that I've gained from having faced them, it's added so much to my life: depth, richness, experiences, people, places, things that I would have never experienced had I not pushed through those things. So I would still encourage people to lean on pushing through the fear.
So any final thoughts that you want to leave the group with? 10 seconds.
Yes. Something that Katie mentioned earlier was thinking about big goals that you have for yourself in smaller steps. My executive coach referred to that as chunking it out, which I love so much. So chunking it out is a way to push the boundaries of that comfort zone, like what you're saying, continue to challenge yourself. And once you get to the first chunk, the 10th chunk is all that much closer. So continue to chunk out your goals.
I say bite-sized pieces, but now I'm going to say chunk.
Chunk it.
Chunk it out. Yeah.
All right. Well, that was actually a beautiful segue to hand it over to Forum.
Do you want to just appreciate these three women with our lovely...
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Let's...
We did get a comment from Ryan, said, Christy swore?
Ryan's my former
I
boss
thought you would...
and good friend now. So.
I thought you would have said shoot, but you went there first.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
you. I'm just gonna pass it over.
Yeah.
You got something?
I swear we did not pay Colleen for that transition, but it was such a beautiful transition about talking about goal setting and being able to take that step. So for everyone who's tuning in, and for those of you here, we ask you to take a blank piece of paper and a pen. So if you want to actually bring that out and get that ready. And for those of you who are joining us, whether that's on your phone or a notepad, I want to give you a second or two to get that ready.
And if you don't have a paper and pen, I mean, you can use your notes on your phone
Or just think about it.
Mental reminder.
yeah.
We heard our amazing panelists talk about incredible journeys and fears that they faced, from the imposter syndrome, right? Struggling with what you think, who you think you are, who you're perceived as, and that dissonance with who you really are. You know, having that fear of failure every day type of thing, right? Knowing that, you know what, today is my day, and that I'm gonna try this, I'm gonna learn something. Or the heights, and being able to conquer that with, you know, living up on a higher floor. So to everyone that's here, I want you to think about something that you may be fearing. And we talked about, one of the things is you may not acknowledge it as fear, but something that you've always wanted to do but haven't had the courage to do. So think about what that is, and take a second to say, what can you do tomorrow? So the bite-sized pieces, or to chunk it out, what can you do tomorrow, what can you do next week, to be able to take that first step. And that first step is probably the hardest step. Because once you get started, it's kind of like that small snowball that starts the avalanche. Once it starts, it's a snowball effect. So think about what you can do, whether it's tomorrow or next week. And I want to give you guys a second to write that down, and then we'll go on to the next piece of that.
And it doesn't have to be any type of thing. It can be big or small. It can be, you know, starting a business, or it could be joining a kickball team that maybe you've been scared of. So there's no right or wrong answer. It's what's something that's important to you.
See, a few people are still thinking and writing. And as you're thinking and writing, think about another piece of this is accountability. And we actually heard that from our audience and our panelists. Accountability meaning it's friends that you're talking to, or it's posting on Facebook, right? This is my fail of the day. That's my success. So who can you, either it's a spouse, it's a friend, someone in your community, that can help you say, okay, this is the next step that I'm going to take tomorrow or next week, and I'm going to do it. So who can help hold you accountable and support you? So write that down as well.
Or do it. Post it on Facebook. Send a text to a friend.
We are
Make it
streaming.
real in some small way.
Yeah.
And for those of you either who are here or who are joining us right now through our stream, if you had difficulty thinking about it or want extra support, this is kind of what we help to do, right? We've created online tools to be able to take a really big thing, a big goal, and shorten that down. So what is it that you're feeling, and why is it a fear? How can you take that next step? Who can help you support and get you there? And what are some tools and strategies that you can utilize, whether that's through our panelists, and we have some in our tools as well. So come join us at our website and become a member.
Can I also just add one more
Yeah.
thing to the bite side, or the chunking it out? I mean, hopefully you've all thought about something that you really would love to achieve, and you've written down your first step. And I would say, you know, once you the accountability is important, and also putting a time frame on it. You know, when are you going to do this by? And once you get there, what's your next chunk? You know, what's your next bite-sized piece? And then just try to get to that one. And then once you get there, what's the next one? You don't have to look to that kind of like far away, distant, big dream or goal, and it feels overwhelming. You know, how is that going to happen? But just those chunks just helps you, okay, what's the next step? Okay, what's the next step? And then all of a sudden you look back and you're like, whoa, like I've actually come a long way, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just, each time you get to that next step, just set another little one and another little one.
Mm-hmm. Yep, thank you. I think a few people are still writing. So share it with the world, get your accountability partner, whoever that is, and take that step. And ask yourself, when in doubt, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? And what's the upside? What am I going to accomplish if I fight this fear? And so with that, I want to transition back to Nicole to kind of wrap us up.
Yeah, absolutely. So we only have a week left in this month where we're focusing on fighting fear, but as I mentioned in the beginning, we have lots of other exciting themes coming up. So a little preview for next month, just in time for the Thanksgiving holiday, we'll be focusing on gratitude and how to remember that in your life, identify the things, you know, internally and externally that you can be grateful for, and some strategies to really learn to express that. So that's what's exciting coming up next month. And I just want to do one more beautiful round of applause for these lovely ladies. So great. So insightful. This is really great. And then thanks for everyone for joining us on this adventure as a whole and here tonight. It means the world to us. It means the world to Katie and Forum that you are all here. And so we're really excited to have your support in building something that we think is really going to change a lot of lives. Anything else?
That's
All
it.
right.
Here you go. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Drink more champagne.
Yay.
Eat more food. Mingle. Talk about fear.